Imagine waking up tomorrow, walking outside, and realizing the thoughts in your head aren't yours. Your body moves, your hands work, you speak, but something else is steering. Not a machine, not a chip, not science fiction, a living organism. Right now on this planet, there are parasites that don't just infect bodies, they rewrite behavior, they override instinct, they alter fear, they manipulate movement, they turn living creatures into vehicles. And the most unsettling part, the host has no idea it's happening. This is secret science, and this is the story of parasites that control minds. In a rainforest, high in the canopy, an ant leaves its colony. At first, nothing seems strange. It walks normally, avoids obstacles, responds to its environment. But then, it starts to wander. It doesn't follow pheromone trails anymore. It doesn't respond to signals from other ants. It climbs, not randomly, not chaotically, precisely. It ascends vegetation to a very specific height, usually about 25 centimeters above the forest floor, a strangely consistent elevation. Then it does something even stranger. It bites down on the underside of a leaf, and it doesn't let go. Not when the sun sets, not when the temperature drops, not when its muscles begin to fail. Its jaws lock in place. Within days, a thin stalk erupts from the back of its head. Spores rain down onto the forest floor below, and the cycle begins again. This ant wasn't sick. It was infected by a parasitic fungus known as Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, often called the zombie ant fungus. But that nickname is almost misleading, because the fungus doesn't fully invade the brain. Recent studies suggest something more sophisticated. It spreads through the body, forms a network around muscle fibers, and releases chemical signals that alter behavior. Instead of directly piloting the brain, it manipulates the system indirectly, like cutting and rerouting wires rather than smashing the control center. The ant's mind is still there, but its decisions are no longer entirely its own. And here's what makes this terrifying. The fungus doesn't just kill the ant. It calculates the height of the leaf, ensures the right humidity and temperature for fungal growth. The location ensures maximum spore dispersal onto ant trails below. This is not random decay. This is behavioral engineering. Nature has evolved organisms that can hijack other organisms, not to feed on them immediately, but to use them as tools. And the zombie ant fungus is only the beginning, because insects aren't the only victims. There are parasites that can make animals lose their fear. Parasites that force creatures into water where they drown. Parasites that alter mating behavior. Parasites that manipulate predators. And some of them can infect mammals, which raises a question we usually don't like to ask. If behavior can be chemically altered, if fear can be switched off, if instinct can be overridden, how much of what we call free will is actually biological stability? And what happens when something learns how to disrupt it? Because once you realize mind control exists in nature, the line between infection and influence becomes disturbingly thin. And the next parasite we're about to look at doesn't just control insects. It rewires fear itself. What if you could remove fear from an animal without removing its intelligence? Because that's exactly what the next parasite does. In barn cities, forests, and alleyways across the world, rodents live in constant danger. Their survival depends on one thing: fear. The smell of a predator, especially a cat, triggers an immediate stress response. Heart rate spikes, cortisol rises. The animal freezes or flees. It's one of the most reliable instincts in the mammalian brain, but there is a parasite that can turn that instinct off. Its name is Toxoplasma gondii. Unlike the fungus that targets ants, this organism infects warm-blooded animals, including humans. Its life cycle begins in cats, the only species where it can sexually reproduce. From there, microscopic eggs are shed into the environment and ingested by rodents. Once inside a rat or mouse, the parasite travels through the bloodstream and forms cysts, inside tissues, including the brain. Now here's where it gets disturbing. In controlled laboratory studies, infected rats behave differently around cat urine. Uninfected rats avoid it. Infected rats don't. In some experiments, they're actually drawn toward it. The parasite appears to alter neural circuits associated with fear and attraction, specifically in regions linked to predator response. The rat doesn't lose coordination. It doesn't lose memory. It doesn't act obviously sick. It simply stops being afraid of the one animal it should fear most, which makes it easier prey, which returns the parasite to a cat, which completes its life cycle. This isn't random pathology. It's targeted manipulation. But here's the rehook. This parasite infects an estimated 1/3 of the human population. Most people never notice. The infection is often mild or asymptomatic in healthy individuals. But research suggests subtle behavioral associations. Studies have linked infection to slower reaction times, increased risk-taking behavior, higher rates of certain psychiatric correlations now. Correlation does not mean control, and the science here is complex and still evolving. But the possibility is enough to unsettle, because unlike the ant fungus, this parasite doesn't destroy its host. It coexists, it embeds, it alters chemistry, it shifts probability, and it does so invisibly, which raises a larger idea. Behavior is chemistry. Fear is chemistry. Motivation is chemistry. Impulse is chemistry. Change the chemistry, and you change the behavior. And parasites have had millions of years to evolve ways to do exactly that. But mammals aren't the only complex hosts being manipulated. Some parasites don't just alter fear, they override entire behavioral sequences. In freshwater streams, there are insects that behave perfectly normal for most of their lives, until one day they climb a blade of grass, or a tree branch, or a wall near water, and then they do something that makes no evolutionary sense at all. They jump into a river, where they drown. Not because they're confused, not because they're malfunctioning, but because something inside them needs to reach water to reproduce. And the only way to get there is to turn the host into a delivery system. And the organism responsible for that doesn't just influence behavior, it times it. Which means what we're about to look at next isn't just manipulation, it's choreography. In shallow ponds and slow-moving streams, grasshoppers and crickets live simple lives. Eat, avoid predators, reproduce. Water is not their destination. In fact, for many of them, water means death. But for some infected individuals, something changes. They begin to behave erratically. They wander away from dry land. They move toward reflections, toward moisture, toward rivers, and then, without hesitation, they leap in. They thrash briefly and drown. From the outside, it looks like a fatal mistake. From the inside, it's a command. The organism responsible is a parasitic worm, known as a horsehair worm, part of the phylum Nematomorpha. As juveniles, these worms live inside insects, absorbing nutrients and growing, sometimes reaching lengths several times longer than their host's body. But they cannot reproduce inside the insect. They need water. So at the precise stage of their development, when they're ready to emerge, the host's behavior changes. Research suggests the worm influences the insect's nervous system, altering phototaxis and hydrotaxis responses, meaning how it reacts to light and moisture. The cricket doesn't know why it feels compelled to move toward water. It just does. When it reaches a stream, the worm bursts out of the body and swims away to reproduce. The insect dies. The parasite continues. This is not random destruction. This is timed neurological manipulation, and it reveals something profound. Behavior is not fixed. It is modifiable, and in nature, it is negotiable. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the hidden side of the universe, consider subscribing. We explore science mysteries every week. And if this sparked your curiosity, leave a comment. Which of these parasites do you find the most disturbing so far? Now, let's keep going. Because the deeper we go into parasitic strategies, the more sophisticated they become. Some parasites don't just alter fear. They don't just redirect movement. They hijack parenting. There is a species of parasitic wasp whose survival depends on something even more intricate than drowning a host. It depends on long-term behavioral obedience. Certain wasps inject their eggs into caterpillars. The larvae hatch and begin feeding internally, carefully avoiding vital organs to keep the host alive. For days or weeks, the caterpillar behaves normally, until the larvae are ready to emerge. They chew their way out of the host's body and spin cocoons nearby. At this point, evolution would suggest the caterpillar should flee, or at least resume normal behavior. But instead, it stays. It stops feeding. It stops moving away. And when predators approach the wasp cocoons, the caterpillar violently thrashes to defend them. It acts as a bodyguard, protecting the very organisms that consumed it from the inside. In some cases, once the wasps fully develop, the caterpillar finally dies. But until then, it performs guard duty. Researchers believe venom and viral particles injected during the initial sting alter the host's nervous system, changing its behavioral responses. Again, not random, not chaotic, precise, coordinated, strategic. The parasite isn't simply surviving, it's outsourcing survival tasks, which leads to a bigger realization. In nature, evolution doesn't just shape claws, teeth, and camouflage. It shapes influence. It shapes control. It shapes ways to bypass another organism's decision-making systems. And if insects can be reprogrammed, if mammals can have fear circuits altered, if complex behavioral sequences can be interrupted and redirected, then we're forced to confront something uncomfortable. The brain is biological hardware, which means it runs on chemistry, which means it can be influenced. The question is no longer whether mind control exists in nature. It clearly does. The question is how far it can go. Because the next example doesn't manipulate an insect. It doesn't just tweak fear responses in rodents. It turns aggression itself into a transmission system. And it has shaped human history for thousands of years. For most of human history, outbreaks of sudden, uncontrollable aggression seemed supernatural. Victims would become restless, irritable, confused, then hydrophobic. They feared water. Their throats spasmed at the attempt to drink. They grew violent, and once symptoms fully appeared, the outcome was almost always fatal. The cause wasn't a curse. It wasn't possession. It was a virus. Rabies virus. Unlike the parasites we've talked about so far, rabies doesn't subtly influence behavior. It invades the nervous system directly. After entering through a bite wound, the virus travels along peripheral nerves toward the brain, slowly, quietly, sometimes for weeks. Once it reaches the central nervous system, it begins replicating aggressively in regions associated with aggression, fear, and motor control. The result: heightened aggression, confusion, impulsivity, loss of inhibition, and most importantly, for the virus, increased likelihood of biting. Biting spreads rabies through saliva. The behavioral symptoms aren't accidental. They are transmission mechanisms. The virus turns aggression into delivery. And here's the rehook. Rabies doesn't need to control complex decision-making. It doesn't need to calculate heights like the fungus. It doesn't need to remove fear like Toxoplasma. It simply pushes emotional circuitry into overdrive. That's enough. Which reveals something critical. Mind control in nature doesn't always look like puppeteering. Sometimes it's amplification. Take an existing trait, aggression, attraction, thirst, movement, and increase or redirect it. Evolution doesn't need perfection. It just needs probability. Now, step back for a moment. We've seen a fungus that positions ants at optimal spordispersal height. A protozoan that removes fear of predators in mammals. A worm that forces insects into water at precisely the right time. A wasp that turns a host into a bodyguard. A virus that transforms aggression into transmission. Different organisms, different strategies. Same principle, behavior can be hijacked. But here's where it becomes even more unsettling. In many of these cases, the host's brain isn't destroyed. It's influenced, tweaked, adjusted. And that suggests something deeper about biology itself. Your thoughts feel solid. Your decisions feel internal. Your motivations feel personal. But underneath all of it, neurons fire because of electrical signals. Electrical signals occur because of ion gradients. Ion gradients exist because of chemical concentrations. Shift the chemistry even slightly, and behavior shifts with it. Which means the boundary between self and influence is thinner than we like to believe. Now, to be clear, there is no evidence of a parasite that can secretly control human societies. There's no hidden organism steering civilization, but that's not the unsettling part. The unsettling part is that the mechanisms exist. Nature has already proven that. Instinct can be overridden. Fear can be suppressed. Aggression can be triggered. Movement can be redirected. All through biological interaction. And evolution is relentless. For millions of years, organisms have been experimenting with ways to manipulate other organisms. Not through strength, but through control. Which leads to the biggest twist of all. What if these parasites aren't rare anomalies? What if they represent a deeper rule of life? Because once you understand how common behavioral manipulation is in ecosystems, you start to see influence everywhere. Not just in parasites, but in symbiotic bacteria, in gut microbiomes, in chemical signals between organisms, in the invisible biological networks that shape life on Earth. And suddenly, the idea of independent will begins to look less absolute and more negotiated. In the final part, we need to zoom out, because this isn't just a story about parasites. It's a story about control, and about how fragile the illusion of autonomy might actually be. Step back and look at the pattern. A fungus calculates height and humidity. A protozoan edits fear. A worm times a suicide jump. A wasp creates a bodyguard. A virus amplifies aggression to spread itself. Different branches of life, same strategy. Change the host's behavior, and you change the outcome. For most of evolutionary history, survival meant sharper teeth, faster legs, better camouflage. But parasites discovered something more efficient. Why evolve claws when you can evolve control? Why chase prey when you can make prey come to you? Why fight a nervous system when you can reprogram it? And here's the deeper twist. These organisms didn't invent new behaviors. They modified existing ones. Climbing already existed in ants. Fear already existed in rodents. Aggression already existed in mammals. Movement toward light or moisture already existed in insects. The parasites didn't create something unnatural. They exploited what was already there, which forces a difficult realization. If behavior is rooted in chemistry, and chemistry can be influenced, then autonomy is more fragile than it feels. Now, that doesn't mean your thoughts aren't yours. It doesn't mean humans are secretly being steered by hidden parasites. But it does mean this. Free will, at its biological foundation, depends on stable systems. Stable neurotransmitters, stable neural circuits, stable internal chemistry. Disrupt the system through infection, injury, drugs, hormonal shifts, and behavior changes. We already accept this in medicine. We know antidepressants alter serotonin pathways. We know hormones influence mood and decision-making. We know inflammation can affect cognition. The difference between treatment and manipulation is intent. Parasites have no morality, no agenda beyond survival. But evolution has shown repeatedly that influencing another organism's mind is one of the most powerful survival strategies on Earth. And once you see that, you start to look at life differently. Every ecosystem is layered with invisible negotiations. Microbes in your gut, influencing digestion and possibly mood. Bacteria, communicating through chemical signals. Viruses inserting genetic material into host DNA, sometimes permanently. Life is not just competition, it's interaction, constant, invisible biochemical interaction, and sometimes control. Which brings us to the final question, the one worth sitting with. If a parasite could subtly influence human behavior without us realizing, how would we ever know the difference between infection and instinct? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the hidden side of the universe. Drop a like if this sparked your curiosity, and if this mystery intrigued you, you might enjoy what's coming next.